Alright, hey everyone, this is Ash. Welcome back to the King's Speech. So just finished recording the Kaiju and Spy Family videos. But I'm going sorry, tripping over my tongue here. I was going to get the videos out tonight, but just based on what time it is right now and how long it's going to take to render and everything, I'll probably push it off to have it released tomorrow evening, just so I can kind of get the most eyes on it at that point rather than releasing it at night when no one's going to see. So we're going to get into the One Piece review here in a second. I'm going to try to keep this as succinct as possible because I'm a little bit disappointed because I went in depth in my last video and it has not gotten as much attention as I would like. So I'm kind of like, alright, why bother trying to get in depth with this chapter as well? So I'll try to keep it as succinct as possible. I won't get too in depth into some of the criticism stuff I'm going to talk about in this chapter specifically. But with that said, without further ado, let's get into it with One Piece chapter 1060, Luffy's Dream. And I did not notice this on the cover page before, but it's even more hilarious, with the criticism and stuff I have of this chapter, specifically of the polar bear having apparently "We stand for liberty" on it. That's just hilarious. But as usual, I'll go from the start and then to the end through page by page, talking about my ideas. So first, I am honestly have gotten so much secondhand embarrassment from Luffy's throwing such a childish temper tantrum in this chapter and just acting so petulant. Like, yeah, he's always had like a childish streak and he's been petulant before, like things like that. But it's never been to this extent where I feel like he's acted like a literal child, like rolling around, like banging his fists and screaming on the ground. Like, it just feels like he's dematured instead of matured since the series began. And, like, it really was just embarrassing to see, like, him acting out like this and seeing Oda think, like, yeah, this is, really great behavior. Which brings us to like the first kind of criticism comment I have, which is Robin kind of reiterating what Koala said back when we first met the Revolutionary Commanders, and Below Betty asked her like, "Hey, don't you have any kind of issues or kind of like hang-ups with the fact that the Fisherman Island is trying to gain entrance to the world government, like given who we're supposed to be fighting against?" And she told her back then like, "Oh, our enemy aren't the kings of the world or the world government itself. It's just the world nobles control them." And you have Robin parroting that again with, once Luffy says like, "Oh, Sabo would never kill Cobra." She's like, "Yeah, I agree with you because the enemies of the Revolutionary Army are the world nobles, not the kings themselves." So I reiterate a point I've made several times on Twitter, which is then, what exactly is revolutionary about the Revolutionary Army if they're not actively seeking to destabilize the monarchy and abolish imperialism? Like, what exactly are the revolutionaries setting out to do? And I feel like this is part of the thing, like, where as the series has gone on, I haven't really had any great expectations for it having any kind of commentary on regarding systemic issues and like overthrowing or overturning these systems of oppression that exist in the One Piece world. But to have it kind of just blatantly spit out on the page like how little they actually plan to do and like how shallow their politics are is kind of amusing to see, right? Because like, again, like offing the world nobles, like throwing them down from power, sure, will fix some of the problems in the world, sure, but it's not gonna fix like everything else that's wrong. And it's even more hilarious with Sabo specifically, because I'm just gonna skip ahead a little bit for this, a page ahead, because Luffy just like whimsically says like, "Oh, Sabo didn't do it. Like, he grew up in a home that controlled him. He just wants everyone to be free." Like, Sabo grew up in a monarchy that had a literal slum just outside the walls where he was grown up and raised in, and the king of that kingdom literally burnt it all to the ground just to please the world nobles and make a good impression. And somehow Sabo, the revolutionary commander, does not see a disconnect there or see an issue with why monarchy should not be allowed to why monarchy should be allowed to exist still. Like, he doesn't seem to understand like that there's an issue with monarchy still existing, like, and why they do. After he grew up in one, and after he saw like the horrendous way that they governed and treated their people, and they're still like, I don't know, once we got the world nobles, knocked down from their perch, all the problems will be solved. The world will become a utopia, the revolutionaries will have achieved their dream. And it's honestly laughable that people claim that this series is so radical in its politics. Just absolutely amazing. And then again, more secondhand embarrassment as Luffy's like, let's go to Alabasta right now, in the same tone of voice as I expect him, kind of complaining and whining. I hear it in the same tone of voice as a kid, when a kid tells a parent, like, oh, I want to go to McDonald's, and the parent tells him, no, we have food at home, you don't need to get McDonald's. And the kid's like, I want to go to McDonald's right now! That is the same energy I feel emanating off Luffy right now. Exact same energy. Especially with the way like Zoro has to be like the voice of reason and tell everyone like why they can't go, and he makes solid points, which that yeah, it's enemy turf. Like, we can go and fight Navy headquarters. Second, we don't know where Vivi is or what condition she's in. How are we gonna find her when we don't know where she even is at the moment? Like, what are we gonna do? Why are we going on a wild goose chase? And again, like, all the Straw Hats, like, bawling their eyes out and, like, doing these over-exaggerated expressions just undercuts any sense of, like, tension or unease that we should be feeling about the news that they've heard. Like, Vivi's missing, Sabo's been accused of murder, shit's been happening since we've been isolated in Wano. None of that comes through because Oda undercuts it with how ridiculous the Straw Hats are acting, like, and how babyish and childish they're being with regards to this. Especially with, like, the name calling. People have pointed out, like, this has been an obvious, like, callback to Alabasta at the very end. And again, like, yes, it's Oda trying to do One Piece's greatest hits all over again. But in Alabasta, like, the childishness, the petulance, like, that worked because, they had just finished celebrating, there was kind of like a somber, I don't want to say bittersweet, like, it was a little bit bittersweet, I guess, ending to the Alabasta arc. It's like, all right, yeah, because we saved the kingdom, everything's back to normal, we had to leave a friend behind. So back then, like, the petulance and stuff worked with them, like, calling out Zoro for being heartless and everything. Like, the comedy worked because the situation wasn't as serious. But when the situation is serious and you do the same bullshit again, it doesn't have the same effect. I don't think Oda realizes that. And it's been a consistent problem even back in Wano. And the scene I reference is back in Wano when they found out that Luffy had been thrown in jail. The Straw Hats could not have given less of a shit. They're just sitting there slurping on some soba, just shooting the shit. Being like, oh yeah, it's okay, I'm sure he'll be fine. He'll bust his way out. So, like, if Oda doesn't take it seriously or treat, news that's supposed to be, like, epic and serious with the respect and seriousness it deserves, why would the readers treat it with, the seriousness that's expected? So, again, like, it feels like Oda definitely has lost his touch in some respects with regards to this. And I don't think he fully realizes the how or why. And again, it very much feels like lately he's going off of a formula of, like, I have to have so many comedic moments in a chapter. I have to have so many of these moments in a chapter. And he's just kind of slapping together with no real regard for how cohesively it holds together. So, yeah. I know Luffy promised to take Caribou on the ship. I don't know why they have him on the ship, even if he is wrapped up. Like, again, I don't know why having him on the Straw Hat crew, again, is not the most interesting thing you could be doing with him, especially given that He knows where two of the ancient weapons are. This feels like, again, Oda's kicking the can down the road, and he'll only become relevant at the very end when the final war is about to start. That's when it feels like Karen will finally be able to go to that person and, tell them, like, oh, I know all this super juicy information that's going to be relevant to you now. So it's kind of like, all right, again, like, Oda keeps promising, like, and telling us that, like, oh, I'm going to answer all these secrets. I'm going to put, like, all these mysteries I've been laying out since the beginning. I'm going to pull them all out in the light now. And now he's just kicking the can further down the road. But yeah. The Straw Hats, of course, also supporting monarchies is absolutely no surprise at all. Again, the series is not as revolutionary as people would like to claim. And again, like, literal secondhand embarrassment for how they're all acting. It was really, really amusing that Zoro's using Ace as an example of, like, this is why you can't go after Vivi. Like, remember what you said about Ace and, like, how we had to let him, like, make his own decisions. And, like, bitch, do you remember what happened to Ace? Like, it kicked off a whole thing where the crew got separated. Luffy almost died. You had to go train for 2 years. Ace ended up dying. Like, Ace is the worst example you could have chosen to make a point about, like, oh, we can't, like, we don't know what's happened with Vivi. We've got to trust in her. Like, you could not have chosen a worse example for, what's going to happen, like, if we don't know about her. Like, she'll be safe. And, like, bad example. But yeah, of course, they all throw little temper tantrums and are picking on Zoro for being the only rational goddamn adult in this entire crew, apart from Robin, who's kind of just doing her own thing, doesn't give a shit. And then she tells them all the news about Cross Guild and everything else, and Luffy's like, oh yeah, Buggy becoming emperor doesn't make sense. He's a little bit more affronted about that than I'd expect, like, given, like, I don't know why he's so upset about that. Like, I don't think he really would make a difference or why he cares so much about the fact Buggy's considered an emperor, but whatever, I guess. Oda had to have him, just be overreacting the entire chapter. Which brings us to, the supposed subject of this chapter, which is what Luffy's actual dream is. And Oda, once again, decides to con everyone, and in a chapter that's entitled Luffy's Dream, he still decides to play coy, and we have absolutely no idea what the hell his secret hidden dream actually is. We just see the Straw Hats reacting to it, and that tells us less than nothing about what it could potentially be. And honestly, with the amount of hype Oda's built up around this at this point, when we get the reveal, no matter what, it is not going to live up to how much build-up he's put into it. I can guarantee that now. I know all the stands are going to lose it no matter what Oda does, because, he can paint a turd gold and they'd say it's a piece of art. But yeah, at this point, like, it's not going to live up to the hype of what he's setting up. Yeah, so we see that Robin kind of mentions offhand, like, oh, Lost Road Poneglyph, no one knows where it is. Who cares? Unless, because the fact that Buggy had to get a loan from Crocodile makes me think he hasn't found Captain John's treasure yet. And I don't know if Captain John was one of the named pirates that was part of Rocks, but if he was, I'm guessing Captain John's treasure will be revealed to be the last Poneglyph. But we'll see. And then we find out that the kingdom of Lilcia, which is apparently ruled by a vampire, we saw his daughter was the one that Kobe rescued on the way to Reverie, have been imprisoned because it's apparently one of the islands that the revolutionaries incited a revolution on. And we see that Sabo's spreading the news on an open comm. That's probably why he didn't use a jamming snail, as he wanted to reveal the presence of Imu on the empty throne to everyone. And of course, he spends so much goddamn time monologuing about it and leading up to it, like, to build up the absolute drama rather than just spitting it out that there's someone sitting on the empty throne. Very much Oda style. And then we find out that a giant spaceship basically obliterates Lilcia because Imu apparently heard that Sabo was on there and decided to kill him. And the Elder Stars basically tell the Marines that are intercepting the call that this island never existed in the first place, has been erased from history, blah, blah, blah. Again, a lot of speculation out there that this is potentially the last ancient weapon, Uranus. I don't think it's that interesting. Like a giant laser ship's like, eh. To me, it just raises more questions. Being like, all right, why hasn't Emu used this before? Obvious answer being like because Oda hadn't thought of it before, hadn't planned for it, he wanted to keep it secret until now. But to me, it also sparks the question of like, all right, for someone that's supposed to be, the covert power behind the throne, is supposed to move and operate in shadow. This seems like a flashy ass weapon to have control of and use so liberally, I want to say. Like, based on nothing more than just a rumor and an intercepted call that they never kind of questioned, like, why he hasn't tried to jam communications or, kind of like code it or anything. They just kind of assume that, yeah, he's just the second left arm of Dragon is just incredibly stupid, apparently. And so they just obliterate an entire island and just are going to brute force anyone into forgetting or thinking it was there. This is also a thing where Ash is going to be like, all right, yes, I don't like this also because I think my theory was better. If you don't like it, jog on. I don't really care. But I still prefer the theory that Uranus was related to gigantification because, again, that's been a plot thread Oda set up for the longest time with, Big Mom talking about how she wants giants because they make the greatest army, how the world government had been experimenting with gigantification forever, how Uranus, is related to giants in mythology. It would have made more sense for Uranus to be related to gigantification in some way rather than being like, oh, instead of a warship, we have a giant floating space laser ship instead. Especially given how Oda felt like, he was doing something different with each of the weapons, like especially with the Poseidon reveal that, like, oh, Poseidon is not, like another ship or something. It's a person. It felt like he was going to go with something, again, like clever and distinct and different for Uranus. So it potentially just being like, oh, it's just a warship because the sky doesn't really do anything for me. And this is not me being like, oh, warships aren't cool. I don't like aliens, like, being introduced in the series or stuff like that. I've theorized that, like, multiple times in the past, I've theorized that, yes, we will eventually find a spaceship somewhere in the series. Like, we'll eventually find one, like, I have a tie into, like, the Ancient Kingdom's history and past and everything. So my issue isn't that Oda introduced a flying spaceship into the series. It just feels shoehorned in. It feels like it's supposed to be a shock factor more than anything. Like, it doesn't feel like it ties into the larger narrative. It doesn't feel like, it's something that was set up. It doesn't feel like a aha moment, like a light bulb moment. It's like, yes, of course that's what it would be kind of thing. If that comes across, I'm sorry, my brain is super tired right now, so I'm not being as coherent as I would like to be, but yeah, we'll see. Like, it hasn't been confirmed that it is Uranus, but again, there's very, very few other things I think it could be at this point. We'll wait for the official confirmation whenever we get it. But that brings us to the only part of this chapter I actually care about, and that is that whatever the next island that the Straw Hats are going to, they have apparently found Jewelry Bonnie there. Apparently she got caught up in some kind of sea phenomenon, and the Straw Hats came to her rescue. I am super excited for this because those of you that know for the longest time, like years ago, I was pushing for Bonnie to be one of the eventual final Straw Hats. And while I like jokingly am saying like, the next Straw Hat theories are going to ramp up after this chapter, I don't think Oda's gonna have her actually join the crew. I think she's gonna become like Law and the others. She'll just become an ally, like off-board crew member at some point. But I'm finally glad we're finally getting her back into the story because I think out of all the supernovas, she did have the most intrigue and setup around her. So I'm curious to see how that gets developed as we find out more of her past, and we see her getting tied into larger events, narratives, and characters. So I'm really excited for that. Looks like, I don't know, I've missed this the first on my first read through, where it looks like Oda might be potentially already splitting up the Straw Hats super early on with this, because you see, again, like, just such a random thing where Chopper, like, it's adorable, Chopper coming out his little straw hat, like, being so proud of himself, and be like, look at my fancy hat, like, oh, look at it, it's so cool, it's a fancy hat. But he gets blown away by the wind, and Luffy latches onto him, and he gets blown away. So it feels like this is setting up for them to ram into Bonnie, get rescued, fly onto the island somewhere, and the other Straw Hats will have to dock and then chase after them. Which should be interesting, because having three, basically the kiddiest kids on the crew, you know, being stuck on an island together, trying to, like, find their way back to the Straw Hats, should make for good comedy. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I think that was the only part of the chapter I really liked. I'm looking forward to and seeing what's happening next. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. But like I said, I did manage to keep this mostly succinct. Well, yeah, like I said, like, at this point, like, even now, rather than wrapping up mysteries, Oda's still kind of too enthralled with just introducing new ones and kind of trying to prove how much more clever than his audience he is. And it just kind of gets sadder and sadder the more you see it. So we'll see what happens when he eventually gets to the point where he can't, keep kicking the can down the road, and he eventually has to answer the questions. So we'll see what happens then. Yeah, so with that said, thank you all for tuning in. As always, if you like my content, please do like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Expect the videos to be out on the channel tomorrow. Until then, this is Ash. I will talk to you all later.